What's up, Flap? Hey, it's Isabel Lininger, DJ.
This is Mr. Lininger here, along with my butler, Isabella.
I'm not his butler, and I'm not his butler, and I'm not his butler. I'm a DJ. No, I'm not. I'm a singer.
All right, we're going to go over Unit 5 today. It says Unit 4, but it's stupid. This is over Unit 5 between 1750 to really 1900. We're not going to go further than 1900. We'll get through all that stuff next unit. And this is the age of imperialism, industrialism, imperialism, industrialism, and communism, the age of isms, and nationalism. Nationalism is going to be introduced through the French Revolution. It's going to become a major category for identity. We'll see some states start to nationally organize, like Italy and Germany. Industrial Revolution is going to happen during this time, the first and the second Industrial Revolution, which you talked about in your newspaper. And you're going to have a huge growth of imperialism, especially in parts of Africa and even parts of Asia. You're going to see large land-based and sea-based empires for imperialism. Traditional religious life is going to be brought under immense pressure by the pace of industrial life and new scientific discoveries like evolution. We're going to talk about the West and the wannabes and everybody else. The West includes Western Europe. The United States is going to become a player during this unit. Canada, Australia, New Zealand. We finally get to talk about Australia and New Zealand. Industrial societies with industrialized militaries. That's what they're all going to have in common. And they're all going to be heavily influenced by nationalism and science. The wannabes are Russia and Japan, who are going to try to industrialize. They're both going to have government-sponsored programs to industrialize their economy. Both imported industrial technology from the West, so they didn't have their own unique industrial technology and Western culture and ideas. But Japan will definitely be more successful. Everybody else is going to be directly influenced, colonized, or indirectly as a sphere of influence to Western Europe during this time. Some countries will still try to maintain autonomy, like China and the Ottoman Empire, but you're going to see them start to really slowly fall. Only Latin America is going to be able to throw out the Europeans out, but they're going to play a similar role even though they played as colonies. So even though Latin America throws Spain and Portugal out, they're still going to be export-oriented economy that produces raw resources for the Europeans, specifically for Britain and America, to buy. So this is the age of revolutions, first off. The revolution started with the American Revolution in 1776, the French Revolution in 1789, the Haitian Revolution, and the Latin American Revolutions. The American Revolution is going to be caused by mercantilism. The British are going to start passing a series of taxes after the French-Indian War. They passed the Proclamation of 1763, which won't allow the Americans to colonize the lands they helped to fight for in the French-Indian War. And then they passed things like the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Tea Act, which are going to cause resentment in the colonies. In 1776, on July 4th, the American colonies are going to declare independence. In 1777, they create their first government, the Articles of Confederation. In 1783, they defeat the British with the help of the French at the Battle of Yorktown, and they signed, that was in 1781. In 1783, they signed the Treaty of Paris, which ends the American Revolution. And in 1789, they set up a new form of government, the Constitution, which we have today. The French Revolution starts in the late 1780s. It's going to be heavily influenced by the American Revolution and the ideas of the Enlightenment. There was resentment towards the royal power. The monarchy was seen as corrupt. There was food scarcity. There was a famine going on, and the rise of Enlightenment ideas. Louis XVI needed money, so he was forced to call the legislative branch to action, the Estates General. Up until this time, the French government had been an absolute monarchy, so the legislative branch had very little power. The French Estates General had three estates. The first estate were the priests, the second estates were the nobles, and the third estate were the peasants. The peasants made up like 95% of the population, but they only got one vote in the Estates General. They were always outvoted. So the third estate's going to refuse to meet unless they create a National Assembly that was based on population. In 1789, the National Assembly swears the Tennis Court Oath to make France a constitutional monarchy. And they signed a document that's based off the Declaration of Independence called the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. On July 14, 1789, this is considered the beginning of the French Revolution, where the Parisian citizens seized the Bastille in Paris, and it serves as a symbol of the French Revolution. Feudalism will be abolished in 1789, and the French Revolution is going to begin. The French Revolution does become radical in 1792 as people become paranoid that the king is going to try to reinstitute monarchy. They had reason to be paranoid. The king was trying to make peace with the Prussians and Austrians to attack France so they could reinstall him as emperor, as king. The King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette will be executed, and you're going to see something called the Reign of Terror, led by Maximilien Robespierre, where thousands of people are sent to the guillotine. But For a good thing, under the radicals, they abolished slavery, they proclaim universal male suffrage, and it temporarily abolishes the spirit of nationalism. The final phase of the French Revolution is going to be under Napoleon from 1799 to 1815, where Napoleon becomes an enlightened absolute monarch. He is an absolute monarch, a despot, and he's really focused on overseas expansion throughout Western Europe, trying to become the #1 ruler in the history of the world. And during Napoleon's conquering of Western Europe and Eastern Europe even, you will see the beginning and the burgeoning of nationalism. Under Napoleon, Parliament will be reduced in power, but he will give religious freedom. He was also going to create a coded law system called the Napoleonic Code. We also have the Haitian Revolution. Toussaint L'Ouverture was the leader of it. It begins on August 22nd, 1781. It was a slave uprising against the French. Francois Dominique Toussaint is going to organize a small military group. It's going to be a symbol of the freedom and hope to resist slaves in North America. And slave owners will become more aware of chance of slave rebellions, and this is going to lead to the increase of slave codes and black codes throughout the South and throughout Latin America. And it's going to actually lead for slaves getting less and less rights in the Americas. And it's the first and only successful slave rebellion and the first rebellion in Latin America. You're going to see the rise of Latin American rebellions throughout this time. Some of the leaders that are going to lead it, Simón Bolívar is going to help unite Northern South America. He creates Gran Colombia. José San Martín is going to unite Southern South America. He creates Rio de Plata. Father Miguel Hidalgo and Agustín de Iturbide were the two leaders of the Mexican Revolution. And Dom Pedro actually was the son of the King of Portugal, and he establishes the independent empire of Brazil. And they're the only country that has a monarchy. The causes of the Latin American Revolution, they are going to be influenced by the Enlightenment. If you remember, Napoleon invaded and conquered Spain and Portugal. So basically, Latin America was meant to govern themselves when Napoleon conquered them. The success of the American and the Haitian and the French revolutions influenced them. Also, the huge social inequalities in the class system between the Peninsulares, the Creoles, the Mestizos had very few rights, the Mulattoes, and the Native Americans, Africans, and Zombos. But remember, this will be a moderate revolution, and for the most part, it's going to be led by the Creoles. All revolutions can result from peasant unrest, industrialization, economic hardship, food shortages. Nationalist ideas are going to help to spur all revolutions. The media, like the newspapers, are going to play a major role in all revolutions. And all revolutions will start to industrialize, although Latin America will be very unsuccessful in industrializing up until the late 19th century in Mexico. Enlightenment thinkers are going to challenge all regimes, and you're going to get some Enlightenment beliefs in all the revolutions, although the American Revolution and the Latin American revolutions will be much more moderate. You will see commercialization and merchants be very involved in the revolutions, and population increase will make it very hard for anybody not aristocrat to gain office, which is going to lead to protesting and the revolutions. This right here just shows the different revolutions and the result of the revolutions. Please look at this, and you definitely need to know this. And they do CCSA sometimes on the AP exam about the revolutions. They all are different in their own ways, and I'm just briefly touching them. Unit 5 is going to be the high point of Western history. It's going to begin with the French Revolution, which will introduce the concept of nationalism, which will also lead to the formation of unified Western states in Italy and Germany. The French Revolution is going to be heavily influenced by Enlightenment and natural rights and the Scientific Revolution. French Revolution does give birth to nationalism as an idea to loyalty to one's nation state. New political ideas in Western Europe, nationalism, growth of nation states and empires, and the rise of democracy. And this is the age of democracy, although it's very slow in some areas. But one of the biggest economic developments, one of the biggest developments in the history of the world is the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is a radical change in organization where you go from an agricultural economy to an economy based on industry. At first, the Industrial Revolution is going to be the putting out system. We have little factories created by the rivers, textile factories that uses the currents of the rivers for mills to spin yarn to create textiles. Later on in the late 19th century, you're going to have the factory system where they use types of energy like coal to create factories in the cities and outside the cities. Innovations in farming and the Enclosure Acts will mean that less people are needed to farm, and a lot of those people that are no longer needed to farm are going to move to cities to become factory workers. Western society's social class will begin to change. You're going to start to see the middle class and the working class. You'll also start to see the poor class, or the proletariat, as Karl Marx would call them. You'll see the rise of ideas like the Marxism and communism. Women will start to work, and so will children at first. Women will start to work inside and outside the home, inside who are working class, not middle class. Middle class women will now be confined to the running of the household, and their whole job will be to educate the children and to raise the family. You'll see the rise of miners, street children, milltown, power looms, and fat cats. Remember what a milltown is? That's how, like, the factory owner had control of the whole city. He owned the stores, and he would only pay them in script, not real currency. Remember the urbanization game we played? There will be a lot of inventions that are going to spur technological advancement. Britain's going to start in the Industrial Revolution. By 1800, several inventions are going to help modernize the cotton industry, and the Industrial Revolution starts with cotton industry. There'll be, it's like the spinning jenny, the power loom. There will be improvements in transportation, and the transportation revolution is going to help to coincide with the Industrial Revolution. There'll be new roads, railroads, and steam power, the steam engine, the steam railroad, the steamship. Factory conditions will be very harsh during this time. There are going to be rigid schedules with long hours and few breaks. Workers would work day after day, week after week, 6 days a week usually, 14 to 16 hours. There were high injury rates, frequent accidents, and if you got injured, you got fired. No workers' comp, no benefits or anything. No job security. You could be fired for without reason. You could be fired if you went sleep with the boss. Women and children are going to be paid less than men, and wages were extremely, extremely low. Living conditions are going to be very poor during this time. As more people move to the cities to work to the factories, especially during the Second Industrial Revolution, you're going to have a huge increase of cities, which causes urbanization. And cities are going to start to be overpopulated. You're going to have the rise of pollution, the rise of disease, and they're going to be cities will sometimes double and triple during this time. People will migrate to the cities looking for work, especially unemployed farmers, due to things like the Enclosure Acts. Remember the Enclosure Act? Cities will become dirty and dangerous. There'll be a high increase in crime and sanitation, STDs, poverty, all that bad stuff. No running water. The results of the Industrial Revolution are going to be manifold. The traditional elite, the aristocratic nobles, are going to see that they're still in control, but there's going to be a new type of elite. The factory owners, the entrepreneurs, are going to start to have economic power in the Western European societies that went through the Industrial Revolution. They'll be called the capitalist upper class. They're going to be entrepreneurs and business people who made their money through the Industrial Revolution, who built factories and run large businesses. There'll be a new middle class developing, and you'll start to see the rise of the middle class during the end of this unit. Professionals, investors, and merchants. They were financially stable, educated, and they aspired to become upper class. And you have the new worker class, or the lower class. They were lowly, unskilled workers, mechanical, poor, uneducated workers that usually worked in the factories. Obviously, not all the factory workers are happy with their conditions, so factory workers are going to start to form unions to try to force for better conditions. In some cases, like the Luddite rebellions, there will be rebellions against the factory workers where they try to destroy the factories. For the most part, the businesses obviously hate unions because unions want to have higher wages for the workers, and there'll be bloody confrontations in Europe and the Americas, in North America. Eventually, there will be laws limiting child labor, shorter working hours, and safer working conditions. You'll start to see new economic structures develop in Western Europe, and a lot of the Western European governments will be afraid of a communist revolution, so they'll start giving laws to the workers to prevent them from rebelling. There'll be compulsory education. This will encourage children not to work, where kids will be forced to go to school until 12, and mandated national education for elementary school, tiny bit of middle school. There'll be wider welfare measures to help out the poor. The Reform Bill of 1832 gave the right to vote to most middle-class men in Britain, so they're going to expansion of suffrage, but not to women. Let's talk about the last big I, imperialism. Industrialism is going to lead to the demand for new markets and new raw resources and labor. Industrialization also provides steam power to better go through Central Africa, to better invade interior Africa and conquer parts of Africa and Asia. The idea of social Darwinism, the idea of the survival of the fittest and the whites were ethnically superior is going to help influence imperialism. The whole idea of the white man's burden, that the white were superior, is also going to influence them. Besides its economic benefits, colonies are also going to become a sign of national greatness, so there was immense pressure to gain as many colonies as possible. In Africa, we have the scramble for Africa. You should remember Shaka Zulu. The Berlin Conference divided Africa. The Boer War between the Dutch settlers and the British, where the British get control of South Africa and Central Africa because of gold and diamonds. Remember stuff like King Leopold, how he conquered Central Africa, stuff like that. In India, British conquers India. Remember the British East India Company? Robert Clive gets India for Britain. The Sepoy Mutiny, where the Hindu and Muslim soldiers rebel against the British. And the Amritsar Massacre, where they massacre whole British soldiers. But eventually, by the end of this unit, the British have complete control over India, although there's going to be the beginning of independence movements within India. In Asia, you have the Meiji Restoration, where they get rid of feudalism and they try to become modernized, and they go through industrialization. They were humiliated by Matthew Perry. The Sino-Japanese War, where Japan goes to war against China, and they go to war against Russia, and they win in the Russo-Japanese War. China is going to start to become dominated by Western Europe. The Taiping Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellions were against that. The Opium War was because of the silver, how the Chinese would only trade in silver for tea, to give the British tea. As a result, the British were selling opium on the DL to Chinese merchants. The Chinese went to war with the British, and the British defeated them and got Hong Kong. And the Open Door Note. You're going to see the expansion of nationalism, white man's burden, industrial revolution. There will be positives and negatives for African and Indian imperialism, and Africa and India are the major places. I'll allow you to look at that and read that, but it's pretty obvious. The Indians will be treated as inferiors, but some Indians will be educated in European schools, and a lot of these leaders will later become the leaders of the independent movements, like Mahatma Gandhi. Unlike India, Africans are not going to be educated in European schools, so the African independence movements is going to be much later than India. Other civilizations will react to imperialism differently. The colonized world was there to provide the West with raw resources, laborers, and market to the mother country. The colonized people are going to resent, obviously, being colonized and viewed as inferiors. These civilizations are going to organize rebellions, all of which will fail to find freedom from the West in this unit. Only Latin America is going to throw out the West, but they're still going to play a secondary role as producing raw resources for Western Europe. So even though Latin America is technically free, they're really economically still subservient to Western Europe. Russia and Japan will be able to keep the West out of their civilizations only by imitating the West. Let's talk about the wannabes. The first wannabe is Meiji Japan. The arrival of the American Navy scared the Japanese into modernizing. They're going to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate and reestablish the emperor ahead. The Meiji Emperor is going to begin a massive government-sponsored modernization plan to industrialize Japan, where they create huge factories called zabatsus. Government are going to buy out nobles and give them government bonds for their land. They're going to make the nobles dependent on the restoration of the working, or they would be broke. Japan is going to play the Western powers off each other, and they're going to actually get involved in European wars and be successful. They create a parliament, but really, even though they have a legislative branch, a lot of the power is still left to the military leaders and the emperor in Japan. Japan's going to begin to imperialize Korea and China because they need new colonies to support their industrial revolution, just like Western Europe does. Since the time of Peter the Great, last unit, Russia has been looking to the West and trying to westernize, but even by this unit, Russia is still behind Western Europe. Like Japan, Russia is going to start to industrialize and try to modernize. They will get rid of serfdom in this unit. Alexander II gets rid of serfdom, and he tries to he tries to copy some Western European ideas. Unlike Japan, however, Russia will not be able to fully industrialize their economy. The Russian economy will still be dominated by agriculture, and even though Russia will get rid of serfdom, the Russian peasants will still have it pretty bad, which will set the stage for the communist revolution. And it's not going to be until Joseph Stalin and his 5-year plans in the next unit that Russia fully industrializes. In the 19th century, most of Latin America is going to free itself from Spain and Portugal. Nationalist leaders like San Martin and Simon Bolivar will try to create United States, but it's not going to be successful. However, Latin America is still going to play secondary roles as providing raw resources for Britain and America for a cheap price. South Asia, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and Burma, they were a civilization but not a unified state. There was a series of dozens of monarchies and literal hundreds of languages. They're going to be slowly colonized by the British East India Company. The East India Company is going to ran the government until the Sepoy Rebellion. And then the British government is going to take direct control over South Asia. The colonization is going to begin it's going to begin because the East India Company sent soldiers to destroy India's textile facilities. India is going to become the jewel of the crown of the British Empire and the wealthiest part of the British government. India is going to support the British government with cotton, indigo, opium, and tea. China, at the start of Unit 5, China is economically and culturally isolated and will have the world's largest economy until 1900. The British East India Company is going to deal opium to China to get back the silver they're losing, which leads to the Opium Wars, which China gets their butts kicked. This is going to result in China starting to lose more and more political power, and then start to become dominated by the Europeans. China is going to be divided into spheres of influence, where different European countries have control over different regions of China. There were two rebellions that are going to try to throw out its foreigners: the Taiping Rebellion, which was the religious rebellion, where the guy said he was a descendant of Jesus, and the Boxer Rebellion, which was the anti-foreign, anti-Western rebellion. Both of these rebellions are going to fail, and China is going to continue to be dominated by Western European powers up until and after World War II. The Islamic Heartland, the Ottoman Empire is going to try to reform itself to prevent the Ottoman Empire from falling, but it's not going to be successful. They will do the Tanzimat reforms, which were military reforms to try to modernize the Islamic empires, but the Tanzimat reforms really don't deal with the economic issues and how the Islamic Heartland was behind economically. The peasants by this time had basically become slaves and serfs in the Ottoman Empire, and he doesn't deal with that. The Janissary Corps does not want the Islamic Heartland to modernize. They did not want the technology to change because they had a position of power. Egypt is going to follow under the sway of Britain, but you get people like Muhammad Ali, who tries to create a united Egypt and tries to create a powerful Egyptian state and breaks off from the Ottoman Empire. You remember the Mahdist revolt, where the Mahdists in the Sudan are going to attack Britain. They were led because they thought they were the pure strain of Islam. They want to kick out the foreigners. They declared a jihad against the Western Europe. They were upset that Egypt was trying to attack them. They were also upset that the British were trying to get rid of the slave trade. Persia during this time is independent, becomes a sphere of influence of both Russia and Britain. So really by this time, even the Islamic heartlands, the Middle East, were dominated by the Western Europeans except for the Ottoman Empire, which was extremely weak, and it's going to die right after World War I. Sub-Saharan Africa, Europeans are going to exacerbate tensions between ethnic groups in Africa to get them to go against each other. The Berlin Conference will divide up most of the continent amongst Western powers. Africa is going to become a big supplier of natural resources for the Europeans, mostly metals and tropical crops, as well as ivory. The Zulu Wars were led by Shaka Zulu, who led a rebellion against the British Empire. It's going to last many years and did significant damage to the British Army, but eventually Zulus cannot overcome the industrial age and the weaponry of the British government, the British Army. The Boer Wars were also in South Africa, where the British take control over South Africa and Central Africa from the Dutch because of the gold and diamond. Best examples of nationalism during this time was Germany and Italy, and Simón Bolívar in Latin America. Germany and Italy unite during this time. Germany with Otto von Bismarck, Italy with Garibaldi. Industrialization, definitely England. Imperialism, definitely England, or the British Empire as it was called by then. Reaction to imperialism, definitely Japan or China, or the Belgians in the Congo. The Ottomans for attempting to modernize, but they failed. Anti-imperialist movements you see in Sepoy, Taiping, Boxer rebellions are the most well-known. Remember we talked about tropical colonies and white settler colonies? White settler colonies were the ones where mostly white Europeans came, like 13 colonies in the Americas, in South Africa. And tropical colonies were colonies that had few Europeans, or mostly used for their economic resources, like in India and Java that the Dutch had control over, and parts of Southeast Asia, like Hawaii. Also, another settler colony is New Zealand and Australia. You're going to see changes in transportation with the steam, the railroad, the telegraph. This will be the era of canals, the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal. Remember the Industrial Revolution, why it originated? You need to know the father of capitalism, Adam Smith, and his rationale and philosophical justification for capitalism and the wealth of nations. How Industrial Revolution impacted family, work, and labor. The relationships between Industrial Revolution and the response of it, Marxism, socialism, and communism. The demographic impact, we're going to see huge migrations as Europeans come to America for jobs, Originally, it's Northern and Western Europeans, like the Germans and the Irish, but later in the late 1800s, it'll be Southern and Eastern Europeans. You also see people from colonies like Indians come to Britain to work in factories. There'll be demographic and environmental changes, like the end of the slave trade. You'll see the increase of birth rates increase during this time, especially in like Africa and Asia. New food supplies and disease prevention and eradication is going to stop the spread of like plagues. Increase in food supply. Second agricultural revolution. All these things are going to bring about social and gender structure. They were brought about because of political and industrial revolutions, intellectual movements, commercial developments, tension between work patterns and ideas about gender, and emancipations of serfs and slaves. And this right here just talks about the effects of revolutions in women. I'll allow you to read that. You probably should know some of that stuff, especially which areas had more rights for women. Russian women do not have a lot of rights still, but they're going to have more rights. It's really in Western Europe and Britain and America where women start to gain the most right, although they don't get the right to vote until after World War I. And that's all we have for this unit, kids. That's all I have for today for Unit 5. We only have one more review video left. Hope this made sense. I know it's super quick and super succinct. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment on YouTube or text me or ask me when I see you next. Deuces.